Recording in progress.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and we'll begin with the recitation of Nembutsu. So please join me in Gassho. Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu. Once again, thank you all for joining us. We have been plodding along the Shoshinge, and I wanted to just start this evening with a little bit of a review, putting things into context. So we are now rounding out the section on Donnan Daishi or Tanwan, and I think I should have mentioned a couple of things last week that I wanted to mention today. So I'm going to just share the screen with you, and there's a couple of things that I wanted to share with you. So, okay, yeah, you can all see that now, right? Okay, so let's see, let me just, okay. We've been going over the Shoshinge, the first half we did on the teachings, and now we're on the second half of the Shoshinge, which talks about the seven patriarchs. And we started off by talking about Nagarjuna, or Ryuju Bosatsu. And in his teaching, in particular, so Nagarjuna was known, or Ryuju Bosatsu in Japanese, was known as the father of Mahayana Buddhism, and he was well known for what we call the Madhyamika school, or the middle path school of Buddhism. And this has all to do with the fact that Nagarjuna, or Ryuju Bosatsu, really emphasize the dependent origination of all things. So every phenomenal thing that happens is based on many causes and conditions. So that means there's no such thing as an intrinsic self. Okay, and so he was a position of what we call non-discriminatory wisdom, or there's no such thing as being or not being. Okay, so you can't look at things at extremes, because when causes and conditions exist, something exists temporarily, or it does exist. You can't deny that. Yet at the same time, that's not something that exists forever, unchanging. So everything is constantly changing, and is based on this whole idea of dependent origination, everything interdependent. And this actually leads to the Mahayana, one of the basic teaching of Mahayana, which is what we call sunyata. Sunyata is sometimes seen as emptiness, but it's not emptiness in the sense that we think of emptiness. It's emptiness equaling the infinite. Okay, so in his teachings, especially to do with the Pure Land Sutra, Nagarjuna, Ryuju Bosatsu states in the 10 stages of the Garland commentary on the chapter of 10 stages of the Garland Sutra, he says, there are innumerable modes of entry to the Buddha's teachings, just as there are in the world difficult and easy paths. Traveling on foot by land is full of hardship, and traveling in a boat on a sea route is pleasant. So it is amongst the paths of the Bodhisattva. Some diligently exert themselves in practice, while others quickly enter non-retrogression by an easy path based on entrusting mind. Okay, so this was Nagarjuna's contribution to the Pure Land teachings, he said that there are, you could look at it as two paths. One is a difficult path and one is an easy path. However, and this is what I didn't emphasize before, is that even the easy path and the difficult path are, as he says here, the paths of the Bodhisattva. Okay, so paths of the Bodhisattva means that it is a path of individuals who are highly capable of practice. So this is actually not for you or I, who are foolish beings full of blind passions. This is, in fact, a bodhisattva path. So beings of higher capacity. Okay, so when Nagarjuna is talking about these paths, he's still at this point talking about those who have left the secular world, have entered the monastic lifestyle, so monks and nuns, at the very least. Okay, and for them, there are two different kinds of paths, he's saying. Okay, so he's saying one is through one's own merits, one's own practice, which is a very difficult path. But then he said there is this other path based on entrusting to Amida Buddha. And that's what he calls the easy path. Okay, so in the past sessions, I did emphasize the difficult practice versus easy practice. But what I forgot, what I neglected to mention was both of these paths, according to Nagarjuna or Ryuju Bosatsu, are both for bodhisattva, which means they have to be, they're already of high capacity. Okay, so that was with Nagarjuna. And then there's Vasubandhu or Tenjin Bosatsu is his contribution, of course, was what we call Tenjin Bosatsu or Vasubandhu himself was a great Buddhist scholar, Buddhist monk, who started off with what we call the Abhidharma doctrine. And this is a doctrine of systematically viewing the mind and the body and breaking it down into its various elements. So he was actually very much into the idea of introspection and looking particularly at the mind. And so from Abhidharma, then he goes into what we call the Yogacara school of Buddhism. And Yogacara is especially important with this consciousness only theory. So he's looking at introspection, and the Yogacara is said that through deep meditation, one could go deeper and deeper into their consciousness. So you have your 6 primary senses. So you have 5 senses plus the 6th one is your your mind. So that's the 6th primary consciousness. Then you have the 7th is what we call our subconscious, unconscious, and then you have subconscious, and then below that you have the what we call the alaya consciousness, which is like the storehouse. And so Vasubandhu or Tenjin Bosatsu was a great master, and he's considered one of the lead individuals in propagating what we call this Yogacara school of Buddhism. However, this Vasubandhu also, and again, this is more to do with those who have become monks and nuns, so the monastics. He says within the Pure Land path, there is a way to go. and he describes his treatise on the Pure Land is broken down into two parts. One is a song or verse, and in that verse they talk about the adornments of the Pure Land, the adornments of the Buddha himself, Amida Buddha, and adornments of virtues of the beings in that Pure Land. Okay, and that's the verse, the song that he begins his treatise with. And then the second part, he talks a commentary on 5 practices for rebirth in the Pure Land. So here again, we're talking about practice. Okay, so this is for monastics basically. So he's saying that there are 5 gates, what we call the 5 gates of entering or associated with the Pure Land. And he starts off by saying, there's worshiping, there's praising, there's aspiration, there's visualization, and then the merit transfer. Okay. And in direct correlation to those 5 practices, there are 5 virtues. Basically, what he does is he creates sort of an example or an easier way of understanding these 5 practices, and he uses this example of approaching this great mansion, and so at the worshiping it is means that you're moving towards it, and praising it is that you're joining a great assembly, people gathered around this mansion. And then the actual aspiration, now you've taken the step into the mansion. And then finally, with a visualization, you've entered the inner room to see the treasure that's in that room. And once you've seen that treasure, you don't just stay there, but you actually return outside uh, to share what you have seen. And that's this merit transference. Okay. However, again, I have to point out that this is practice for bodhisattvas, beings of high capacity. And so both Nagarjuna or Ryuju Bosatsu, and so these two, Nagarjuna and Vasubandhu, they talk about practices of bodhisattvas who want to move towards the Pure Land or be born in the Pure Land. Here is the path for bodhisattvas to enter the Pure Land. Nagarjuna says there you can categorize it in 2 ways: difficult, hard practice, or easy practice. But still, nonetheless, these are practices for bodhisattvas. Similarly, Vasubandhu states, there are 5 gates, or what he called the 5 gates. And there are 5 ways of, this is 5 gates, right? There are 5 things that practice is involved with the bodhisattvas. Okay, so why these 2 things are important, and that's when we get into Donna, right? And so I mentioned it briefly about how Donna was the one who brought these 2 ideas, the Vasubandhu's teaching, along with Nagarjuna's, and he brought them together. Okay, so in Nagarjuna's ideal of sunyata, or the middle path, neither this nor that, in the idea of sunyata, it said that everything, form is not form. If you look at the Heart Sutra, we talk about it comes out quite prominently about how the existence and non-existence are actually the same. And Donan actually brings us out in when he's making a commentary on the treatise on the Pure Land, which is a writing by Vasubandhu. And he begins it by, when we see that, where did I put that? Oh, maybe it's, So at the very beginning of Donnan's commentary, he quotes Nagarjuna's writing and states that there are two paths to a stage of non-retrogression, the difficult path and the easy path. And he gives reasons why the difficult path is not something that we can do at this time. He goes further, Donnan goes further in his explanation of Amida Buddha, and he is the one that introduces the idea of self power versus other power. Okay, and this whole idea is that according to Donnan, he says everything that we do on our own merit is called self power. But he, again, following Nagarjuna's thought, he says the true reality transcends our self power. And that is what he calls the working of Amida Buddha. So Donnan says that both going to the Pure Land, now he's commenting on Vasubandhu's writing, the whole idea of going towards and then coming back. So in Vasubandhu's teachings, remember the five gates, the worship, praise, and aspiration, that's going towards the Pure Land. Okay, you're going towards this mansion, you're entering the mansion, all that is going towards the Pure Land. And then visualization is when you're actually at the Pure Land, right? You see Amida Buddha. But then you don't stop there, you come back to this world, right? According to the teachings. And what Donnan says is that this is actually part of what is written in the 22nd vow. It states that when those beings who go to the Pure Land, if they so wish, can return to this world to help those in suffering. And this is what Donnan picks up on. He says, both going to the Pure Land and coming back from the Pure Land is the working of what we call other power. Okay, and this point is very important because if it is the working of other power, the working of Amida Buddha, then, and this is why predominantly or most importantly, why Shinran Shonin truly appreciated Donnan Daishi or Tanwan. And that is this. If it is the working of other power that is a cause for us to be born in the Pure Land and for us to come back, then one does not necessarily have to become a bodhisattva, a monk, or a monastic. You see, because it's not because of things that I am doing. It's not because of the merit that I am gaining through my practice that I'm allowed to be born into the Pure Land or attain enlightenment. It is through the working of Amida Buddha, this whole idea of other power. And so this one particular notion really revolutionized for Shinran Shonin his understanding of the Pure Land Buddhism and what Onenbutsu is. So as it was written here, we went through this the section on Donnan Daishi as far as his the Shoshinge portion is concerned, and it started off, of course, with the Emperor Liang bowing towards the direction of where Donnan was because he considered him like a bodhisattva. And then it talks about Donnan's meeting with Bodai Rushi and how he threw away his Taoist scripts to follow the Pure Land way. And here I'm explaining again in the Vasubandhu's writings on the whole idea of going towards the Pure Land and coming back from the Pure Land, Donnan clarifies that this is completely the working of Amida Buddha, or the birth is lie in the vow. So it's the vow of Amida Buddha. Okay, so our going and returning directed to us by Amida come about through other power. So he's the first one in the Pure Land Masters to really emphasize this other power. And the decisive cause is this entrusting mind, or what we call Shinji. Okay, so when we awaken to this power of Amida, we entrust to it completely. And so he continues on, when a foolish being of delusion and defilement awakens Shinji, he realizes that birth and death itself is nirvana, is itself nirvana. So this is Donnan Daishi taking from Nagarjuna, the first of the seven patriarchs, his idea of this sunyata, or middle path, or being and simultaneously not being. So birth and death is nirvana. Okay, it sounds paradoxical, but what he's saying is, as it is, we're embraced in nirvana. Without fail, he reaches a land of immeasurable light and universally guides sentient beings to enlightenment. So this is the expressing about coming back from the Pure Land, right? So through the working of Amida Buddha, we go to the Pure Land, but also through the working of Amida Buddha, we come back as part of great compassion, as part of the working. Now we come back to liberate those still in suffering. And so in his poems, the Shinran wrote in his latter years, he clarifies this further, deeper. So he says here, so in these wasans, these poems, Shinran starts by talking. He's actually written 34 poems on Donnan Daishi, which is one of the most of any of the seven masters. And he talks about how he receives the teachings from Bodhi Rishi, and he enters the Pure Land path. And he then emphasizes this other power, the working of the primal vow, and which says, guiding foolish beings bound by their blind passions, he led them to enter the gate to nirvana. The Lord of the mundane world came to inquire why he aspired for the Pure Land, and basically Donnan says there's too many Pure Lands to visit, so he's focusing solely on Amida. And he says, since my wisdom is shallow and I have not yet attained the higher stage of bodhisattvahood, I am incapable with my powers of mindfulness, of thinking equally on all lands. So, as I mentioned earlier, that both Nagarjuna, or Ryuju Bosatsu, and Vasubandhu, or Tenjin Bosatsu, even though they talked about past the Pure Land, they were both practices, or they considered it practices for bodhisattvas. Whereas Donnan brought it down to the average person. He says, again, because my wisdom is shallow and he has not attained the higher stages of bodhisattvahood, he's incapable of mindfulness, of thinking equally in all lands. And that's why he focuses solely on Amida Buddha. Neither monks nor laity had any place to turn for refuge. Master Tongwan alone resolved to lead them to aspire for the land of happiness. At the behest of the Emperor Wei, he lived at Taoyuan Temple in Pingchu. Later, and I mentioned this last week about how he spent his life, and he was so highly regarded, both for Buddhist teachings but also for Taoist teachings. And the emperor asked him to live at this particular temple, but Donnan preferred the mountain monastery, and so he moved back there. And is talking about how the emperor venerated him, and here it talks about when he passed away. Oh no, well, basically talks about his life, and then at 67 he entered into the Pure Land. Then we're so number 11 here of these poems, again, now he's getting it more into the teachings as opposed to his life. And Shinran says, although we had this treatise on the Pure Land written by Vasubandhu, in fact, it was so difficult, people really couldn't decipher it until Donnan or Tanwan. And so he says, although we had the words of Bodhisattva Vasubandhu, without Donnan clarifying it, we really wouldn't have known about what it meant. And this is the teaching of other power. Knowing truly that the primal vow, the perfect one vehicle that brings about sudden attainment, grasps those who commit grave offenses and transgressions, we are quickly brought to realize that blind passions and enlightenment are not two in substance. So again, Shinan is pointing out to the fact that it's not whether you're a monk or a nun or a bodhisattva. He says even those filled with blind passions, when they awaken, when they hear and awaken to the primal vow of Amida, at that one instant they are liberated. And he says then we begin to realize that our blind passions and enlightenment are not separate things; they're one and the same. And he talks about the five inconceivabilities taught in the Pure Land. The power of the Buddha Dharma is supreme. And this refers to Amida's universal vow. And he said Amida's has fulfilled the directing of virtue, which has two aspects, the going forth and returning, coming back. And through these virtues, we are brought to realize both mind and practice. So the directing of virtue for our going forth is such that when Amida's active means towards us reaches fulfillment, we realize Shinji and practice of the compassionate vow, then birth and death is itself nirvana. So when we really awaken or receive the working of Amida Buddha, then Shinjin comes about, or this entrusting heart. And again, similarly with coming back to this world. So in the treatise of Vasubandhu, he talks of the mind that is single, and Tanwan explains that this is, in fact, Shinjin, the entrusting heart or mind, which is itself the working of other power. So basically, through the working of Amida's vows, we have that one thought moment of joy, and through the benefit of unhindered light, we realize Shinjin of vast majestic virtues, and the ice of our blind passions necessarily melts, immediately becoming water of enlightenment. And this next poem is quite well known, and as he compares the ice and water, he says the more ice there is, as it melts, the more water it creates. Similarly, the more obstacles we have, the more blind passions we have, when we awaken to Amida's compassion and working, the more virtues that we will also create. So the ocean of inconceivable name does not hold unchanged the corpse of the five grave offenses and slander of the Dharma. The myriad rivers of evil acts on entering it become one in taste with the ocean water of virtues. So what he's saying is that even though we are full of defilements, and he talks about the five grave offenses and slander of the Dharma, when they enter the ocean of working of Amida Buddha, they naturally become they naturally are changed, just like the rivers, the water of the rivers become the taste of the ocean. Rivers of blind passions on entering the ocean, the great compassionate vow of unhindered light filling the 10 quarters, become one in taste with the sea of wisdom. Being born in the Buddha land of happiness is a path to ultimate attainment of Buddhahood. All the Buddhas acclaim the Pure Land, for birth there is unsurpassed means. So Tanwan teaches that the Buddha adorns the 3 modes of action, and this is the 3 modes of karma, so that they are characterized by ultimate non-discrimination. This is to heal the bodily, verbal, and mental acts of beings, which are false and delusional. So once we enter the working of the primal vow, naturally our bodily, verbal, and mental acts begin to change according to the working of the vow. So we begin to understand the existence, the oneness of existence. And so naturally, you become more empathetic. Naturally, you speak more gently or with that mind of oneness. And naturally, your actions will go uh, to promoting that or to help that. Tanloan teaches that we reach the Buddha land of happiness solely with the name, the unsurpassed gem, and true Shinjin. For those born there, follow no other way. So it's through the name of the Buddha that we are born there. So this next one, 26, Tanwan or Donnan is talking, or Shinnan is talking in this poem. This poem is coming from the writings of Donnan, the commentaries, and Shinnan is saying that Donnan says, although initially there are 9 grades of beings, so in this world it's been broken down to 9 different grades of beings. When we attain or birth is attained through Amida's pure primal vow, because it's the working of Amida Buddha, it is a birth that is no birth. In other words, there is no discrimination. There is no different grades that you are born into. Everybody, despite what grade of being you were in this world, are all equal. And that's why it says birth that is no birth. So this no birth is reference to um, 9 different grades of birth. And so this actually goes right back to the historic Buddha, because back in the times of the historical Buddha, or even today, there was a caste system. And the only way you get from one caste to another caste was through rebirth. And through that, if you did uh, meritorious acts in this life, or did good deeds in this life, in the next life, you would be in a higher birth. Okay. So if it was up to our own merit, then after we pass away and are birth in the next life, um, you will be ranked within this different ranks. But because born into the Pure Land, or born into the Pure Land, is based on the working of Amida Buddha, there is no ranking. Everybody becomes equal. The name of the Tathagata of unhindered light, and the light that is an embodiment of wisdom, dispel the darkness of a long night of ignorance and fulfill the aspirations of sentient beings. So the ignorance here is the fact that we discriminate and we look at things differently. But when we truly awaken to Amida's working, we see that all is one. So this next one, Tanwan is talking about uh, so failing to practice in accord with reality. What he's talking about is shinjin that is not true and real. So there is um, shinjin or interesting heart is genuine when it is exists all the time, and it is one mind, single, and it continues on. Okay, whereas Shinjin or what is it? He says Shinjin that is not genuine. So in trusting heart, but it's not really genuine in trusting heart, is when it seems to appear sometimes, exists sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't. So it's not really that committed. And then second, Shinjin is not single, so it lacks decisiveness. So you're talking about Shinjin of this, but you also do this and you also do that. He says that that's not in true entrusting as well. Sometimes you hear of people covering all their bases. He said, well, that's not the good thing. So you have to really focus on one thing. And true entrusting means you give it completely to given completely to Amida Buddha. So if it's truly entrusting to Amida Buddha, you shouldn't have to cover your bases by entrusting in Amida Buddha, but also entrusting in this one or entrusting in something other teaching as well. And then finally, it's not true Shinji if it doesn't it lasts. So if it again comes and goes. Okay. Uh, and these three actually lead one to another. The not untrue Shinjin. Um, because one's Shinjin is not genuine, then it is not decisive, and it's because it's not decisive, it doesn't endure. Okay, it comes and goes, and okay. Oh, and it's 32 is a misspell. Should be because one does not realize Shinjin that is decisive. It's sort of a vicious circle when you don't truly entrust. And basically, he's saying that Donan Daishi or Tanwan states basically that we really have to entrust into the working of Amida Buddha, particularly at this time. So then we come to the next of the seven patriarchs, who is Tao Cho or Do Shaku Zenji in the Japanese. And he lived between 562 and 645. And interestingly enough, he didn't enter in the Pure Land teachings until quite late in his life. So he became a monk when he was 14, and for many years devoted himself to the studying of Buddhist sutras. And he was well versed in what we call the Nirvana Sutra. But it wasn't until 48 when he read an epitaph praising the doctrine of Donnan Daishi in this temple, Genjuji, which is a Japanese pronunciation. I'm not sure what the actual Chinese pronunciation is. Um, when he read the inscription praising Donnan Daishi, who had passed away by the time Doshaku came to be, but Doshak was so moved by this inscription on Donnan that he turned the rest of his life to the Pure Land teachings. And in fact, Doshaku became such a devout follower of the Nembutsu, and it was said that he recited the Nembutsu up to 70,000 times a day. Okay? And he really emphasized this idea of uh, reciting the name of the Buddha because it was a true act of entering the Pure Land. He said, the more you recite it, the better it is. And he took particular affinity to the Contemplation Sutra. And this Contemplation Sutra on Amida, as you all recall, is the story of Vaidehi and her son Ajatasattu, Prince Ajatasattu, and her husband, King Bimbisara. But it is a lot to do with visualization in the sutra, visualizing the Pure Land, visualizing the adornments of the Pure Land, and finally visualizing Amida Buddha in that Pure Land. And for Doshaku, the practice of reciting the name became so important for him that he used the beans. Started by using beans to count it, and then used the juzu, the counting beads, to count off how many times he was chanting. His Donnan's contribution to the Pure Land teachings was basically his belief, and I talked about this at the very beginning of these lectures, about the various Dharma ages, that there's what we call the right Dharma age, the semblance Dharma age, and the last Dharma age. And how it was calculated was that for the first 500 years after the Buddha passed away was considered the right Dharma age. And then for the next 1,000 years was considered the semblance Dharma age. And then for the next 10,000 years was considered what we call the Mappo era. Now, as I mentioned here, he was born 562. And according to calculations at that particular time, it was thought that the Buddha was born 900 somewhat years before Christ. So when you look at it, from 900 something before Christ to this 562, there's approximately 1,500 years. So 1,500 years since the passing of the Buddha. The first 500 years is what we call the right Dharma age. The next 1,000 years is a semblance Dharma age. So by these calculations, by the time Doshaku came to be, they were now in what they call the last Dharma age. And in that last Dharma age, basically it was said that the only path available to enlightenment was through the path, Pure Land path, or the Nembutsu path. That at this particular stage, no longer the path of sages, the difficult path, that was no longer viable, according to Doshaku's understanding. What's interesting about this, we now say actually the Buddha was born approximately 500 something years prior to Christ. So if that were the case, 562 AD would still have them in the middle of what they call semblance Dharma age. But back when Doshak was alive, it was believed that the Buddha was alive about 900 years before Christ, and hence his assumption that they were in this last Dharma age. And he gives what we call two reasons and one proof of why the Pure Land path is the only path. And one, he says, we are in an age far removed from Shakyamuni Buddha. Again, he calculated approximately 1,500 years after the Buddha. And the teachings of the path of sages are too profound to be completely understood in this era. So he says, one of the defining factors of this Mappo, or the last Dharma age, is that there are very few who can actually practice the teachings because of the defiled world that we live in. And so he says that they're too profound to understand the path of sages. And finally, he quotes from this sutra called the Daishu Gatsuzo Kyo. And he says, of the multitudes of beings who have followed the practices of the path of sages in the last Dharma age, not one has yet attained enlightenment. Because this is the age of the last Dharma and a world corrupt with 5 defilements, the Pure Land teaching is the only path we can follow. So this was Doshaku's contribution. Because we're in this particular era, he said, the only path we could follow is the Pure Land path. So in the Shoshinge, the section on Doshaku reads, Tao Cho determined how difficult it is to fulfill the path of sages, and reveals that the only passage through the Pure Land gate is possible for us. He criticizes self-power endeavor in the myriad good practices and encourages us solely to say the fulfilled name embodying true virtue. With kind concern, he teaches the three characteristics of interesting and non-interesting. So this is to do with what Donlan talked about, the sincere, uh, the shinjin that is single, that is lasting, and genuine, that is single, and that is constant, right? And Tao Cho talks about this too. And it compassionately guiding all identically, whether they live when the Dharma survives as but form, the semblance Dharma age is this known as, when in the last stage, so the last Dharma age, or even when it has become extinct. So after this 10,000 year period, the Buddha said that the Dharma will eventually become extinct. Though a person has committed evil all his life, when he encounters the primal vow, he will reach the world of peace and realize the perfect fruit of enlightenment. So when they, even though they may have done evil throughout their life, if they encounter the primal vow or the teachings of Amida Buddha, they will enter the land of peace. So these are 7 hymns or songs or poems. Again, are come from the Wasans of Shinran Shoni, and it basically expands on the passage within the Shoshinye. So, setting aside the myriad practices of Path of Sages, our teacher, Master Tao Cho, proclaims a single gate of the Pure Land Way as the only path that affords passage. Setting aside his extensive work on Nirvana Sutra, our teacher, Master Tao Cho, entrusted himself to other power, the working of the primal vow, and urged the multitudes of world of 5 defilements to do so also. Sentient beings of the 5 defilements in the last Dharma age may perform the practices of past sages, but not one will thereby attain realization. So states the world honored one, the master of the teachings. Following the teachings of Master Tanlam, Master Tao Cho also determined that to awaken aspiration for enlightenment and perform practices in this world is the way of self-power. Wrongdoing and evil acts in the defiled world are like violent winds of torrential rains. All the Buddhas, sobered by this, urge us to take refuge in the Pure Land. Though we commit evil throughout our lives, if we say the Nembutsu always, with our hearts turned wholly to Amida, our obstructions fall away by the vow's spontaneous working. In order to guide sentient beings, even though they commit evil all their lives, Amida urges them to say the name, vowing not to attain Buddhahood if they are not born. So again, for Tao Cho, Doshaku, it was this idea that he receives from what he uh, learned from the teachings of Donnan, although they weren't directly connected. Um, he followed Donnan's teachings and understood that the working of the primal vow, the working of Amida Buddha, is the sole way of being liberated in this last Dharma age. And the way that we encounter that Amida Buddha is through the name, through the Nembutsu, through reciting the name. And so for Doshaku, his main focus was reciting the name. And hence, as I said, he recited the name up to 70,000 times a day. 70,000 times, that's quite a lot to do in one day. So this will conclude the section leading up to Doshaku. So of the 7 patriarchs, he's not one of the ones that Shinran really, I mean, he's included, but not as important as some of the others. And so from Doshaku, then we go on to, so we looked at these two now, Tanwa or Donnan and Doshaku or Taocho. So actually, next week I'm going to ask to take 1 week off because I have to go to Manning Park this weekend, and so I don't know how much time I'll have to prepare. And I also have a funeral when I come back on Tuesday morning, so not much time to prepare. But uh, what I'm hoping to do in 2 weeks, we'll talk about Shantou, and there's actually a lot to cover for Shantou Zendo Daishi. And then following that, Genshin and Honen. So I'm hoping to wrap everything up within the next 2 to 3 weeks, except that's not next week, but 2 weeks from now. Okay, so we'll talk about um, Shantou, Zendo Daishi, and that'll probably be at least one session in itself. Um, it might cover more than one, and then hopefully I can go through Genshin and Honen in one session as well. So 2, possibly 3 more sessions. So I hope that you will be able to join us. That'll bring us to almost the end of June. Um, Mid to end of June. And then we'll take a break until the fall, and that'll actually conclude this lecture series on Shoshinge. So thank you all for continuing to join me with this lectures on the Shoshinge. And again, if you have any questions or queries or um, comments, please either say something now, or you're more than welcome to um, comment via online. Or does anybody have any questions? Michael, did you want to say anything?
Okay, I was mulling the question around, which was that the concept that Amida's vow was for all beings other than just people on the Bodhisattva path, monastics. Did that stay completely consistent all the way through the rest of the masters, or did Genshin or somebody sort of have differing ideas?
I think actually it is consistent with the rest of the 7 patriarchs. However, Shinran took it one level further than all the other masters. So he truly emphasized this working of other power, that we are completely incapable of doing anything as far as it pertains to being born in the Pure Land. Okay, as far as that is concerned, he said it's really completely the working of Amida Buddha. Whereas with the other Pure Land masters, there's still like, even though Donan mentions other power and self power, there's still an aspect of I am the one that has to do the practice to attain. And so there's still this aspect of um, the practicer. It's like Amida Buddha provided the practice, but the practicer, it's up to the practicer to take that in order to be born in the Pure Land. Whereas Shinran said, I'm completely incapable of doing anything. So he looked at it that anything that we do is tainted and is really completely working on Mita Buddha. So he sort of took it to a different level, basically.
Okay, thank you, Sensei.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anybody else have any comments, questions? Karen?
Actually, Sensei, I do have a question. You know
Okay.
how you said that we go to the Pure Land and then we come back?
Yes.
So when we go to the Pure Land, how long do we stay there? Like, is there a determined, like, is it instantaneous? We go there and right away we come back? And if we do come back, what form do we come back in? Is it like human form, or like, how do we know?
Hmm. Good question. I don't have an answer for that actually. Uh, uh, I I would like to say actually it's probably instantaneous because there is passages that say that there is no one there at the Pure Land, and what that means is that once you become a Buddha, your workings start as pure compassion to liberate others in ignorance. And what form we come back in, it can be any form. It doesn't define itself. So even like a worm or a slug or a mosquito can lead one to awakening. And so we might come back as a fly for all I know. But it's not when you come back in that form, you're not coming back in ignorance. So, as I mentioned with Vasubandhu, that example of you have uh, worshiping, praising, aspiration for birth, and then you have the actual visualization. But then there's what we call merit transference. Okay, so you're coming with back as an awakened being. So at the very beginning of the Kyogyo Shinsho, Shinran Shonin calls uh, he points out specifically Devadatta, Ajatasattu, and Queen Vaidehi, and he calls these three. He calls them incarnated ones, incarnated ones, and what that means is that they have come back from. They have come back from the Pure Land or the world of oneness to help teach us to understand the teachings, the Nembutsu teachings. So he calls them incarnated ones. Whereas I don't think you'll find many places that will refer to somebody like Devadatta. Devadatta was the cousin of the Buddha, but he was sort of like the Judas of Buddhism. He was always very jealous of the Buddha and wanted to lead the Sangha for himself, and always did things to try to get in the way of Shakyamuni. And he's the one that also told Ajatasattu about his birth and what happened when he was born. He's a troublemaker, real troublemaker. But Shinran specifically calls him an incarnated one. So he says they've come back to help teach us something about the Pure Land or direct us to the teachings. So, what form we come back in is it. I couldn't say, but you come back to help lead others. Yeah. Are
But you
there?
don't come back as a higher evolved form then. It could be a lower form, right? With negative
Well,
qualities.
it's all relative. From when we look at it,
Like
from our rose-colored glasses, we might say they're lower forms, but
Oh.
they may be much higher forms than we are.
Thank you, Sensei.
Oh, you're welcome. Suezong, nobody, did you have anything to say or?
No.
No. How about Rose and Ted? Oh, Atsumi-san, you have something to say? You have to unmute yourself. You're muted.
I have a rather basic question.
Hi.
when our how do you call it, practice, our parents or grandparents passed away, we call them Hotoke-sama. Is this
Mhm.
same Hotoke-sama as we are talking about here, or different? I
No,
don't.
so in Jodo Shinshu, this is Jodo Shinshu, okay? In Jodo Shinshu, we all become one with Amida Buddha. So we all become Hotoke-sama, one with Amida Buddha. Amida Nyorai は仏なんですよ。ね。we all, Hotoke is a Japanese word for Buddha. And so they also say when somebody passes away, they become Hotoke. In fact, in Japanese, they kind of took the word and they've changed meaning sometimes. So in crime dramas, for instance, when where somebody is killed, and they'll call the victim that's been killed. They say, "Oh, Hotoke-san, Hotoke-san," but they're not really referring to that person as becoming Buddha. They're just the dead being is they call it Hotoke-san, but it literally is you become a Buddha. So yes, when they talk about Hotoke-san, they all become one with Amida Buddha. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Ted, Rose, anything? Yeah, unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi, Sensei. Thank you. I guess the question is, like, we're looking at something historically, which is very important in our lives because we've come from there. And things are, causes, conditions, things are moving along. The thing because I'm not of Japanese descent and I haven't grown up in that tradition, although I've been involved in our temple for 40 years. But still, I think of myself now, where am I in this time to take the teachings, to take refuge, the sanctuary, but then to be in the world and to take Sensei. So how, I know this is, and I'm sure we're going to be talking about this as time goes on, but I think of all of these things as the Pure Land as a metaphor for something, as a not a place, like not with an address, it's so metaphorically, if I'm taking refuge, sanctuary, but it's not just me, it's all of us. So how is that working? I know that's maybe a big, I don't know what the question is, but I just think that yeah, so if we've come back, maybe I'm already come back from something and I've got more to learn. Do you know, it's just not maybe, I'm sure I have. So it's this thing, this working that is so it feels like it's straightforward, and yet it seems to have so much around it to discover, and yet there's the simplicity of the entrusting heart. And so taking that as a Shin practitioner or person into the world that I'm living in a Mapo age, I don't want extinction. I would like to think that somehow I can be one of those, part of something that can help with suffering, help with homelessness, help with all of the things that have been with us forever. So yeah, I know I'm rambling now, but it's a big thing.
Well,
Thank you.
it was so there's the story of a Taoist meeting a Buddhist monk, and they're exchanging ideas of what their teachings are like. And the Buddhist monk says, the teachings of Buddha tell us if we do good acts, we will have positive results. If we do negative or bad acts, we will have negative results. And the Taoist says that's such a simple teaching. Even a 3-year-old can understand that. And that's when the Buddhist monk says, yes, it's so simple that a 3-year-old can understand, but it will take a lifetime to truly practice. And I think that's the case, is that, you know, all these things that we are hearing or studying or learning about together, it's, you know, it's part of a path, is what it is. And so I don't think there's a you know, there is no one absolute answer. If there was, I think things would stop. But I think we're on a collective journey that we all are learning together and growing together. And I think that's the important thing is through our experiences, shared experiences, we grow and learn. And as you say, it's a metaphorical when we look at these words and, you know, talk about these figurative analogies, and they are in fact metaphorical, but yet at the same time, there's a truth to it. And again, this is completely in line with that idea of sunyata, of being and not being, form and not form. So these words are words, but they're not words. They're metaphors, but they're not metaphors. They themselves are truly manifestations of the truth. And so, you know, as we go on this journey, incrementally, we broaden our minds, maybe. But I think that is what it's all about. And yeah, so I agree with you that it's not just one particular thing, and there's no absolute answer to it. In other
Yeah.
words, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to say anything, comment? Or?
I have a question regarding what Karen asked. I thought, so once you were born in Jodo,
Mhm.
come back to this world to teach. I thought they were coming back as someone like teacher, but you said like Devadatta, Queen Vaidehi, and those people, you say that they are the ones who came back from Jodo.
Yeah, that's how Shinran saw them. Okay.
Oh. Mhm.
So Shinran Shonin viewed them as such. So there's a philosophy called Bodhisattva everywhere. And when we receive the mind of Amida Buddha, you begin to see all these things as teachings for us. So both positive and negative things. Whether Devadatta was actually a Buddha or came back, that's almost secondary. It's how Shinran received them. Okay, Shinran saw them as teachers. So, you know, a lot of it has to do with our understanding, our perception. When we begin to listen to or receive the teachings, then you can begin to see things that, or you start thinking about things a little differently. So it's not all, you know, black and white, where you would say, "Oh, this is an evil person," or "This is a bad person." But you begin to realize, oh, maybe this is something that has come into my life to teach me something, and we begin to see, understand, take a little different perspective of how um, we see the world around us. So, my grandfather used to tell me that Buddhism is not about changing the world, but it's about changing yourself. Okay. So, in other words, the teachings are there to help us see deeper about ourselves and how we perceive the world. It's not for us to say, the teachings aren't there to say, okay, you should do this way, or, you should act this way because the world needs to change in this way. It's more about when I listen to the teachings, it changes myself. And it's maybe a hard concept to get. But again, Shinran Shonin in the Tanisho says, as for me, Shinran, this is the path. As for me, Shinran, this being of simple understanding. Here, I'll bring out that quote. Should I quote it exactly? Shinran says, such in the end is how this foolish person entrusts themselves to the vow. Beyond this, whether you take up and accept the Nembutsu or whether you abandon it, is for each of you to determine. So for Shinran Shonin, this was his path. And what he's saying is everyone has to listen to the teachings, and it's really how we perceive things. So whether actually Devadatta and Ajatasattu and Vaidehi, Shinran calls them incarnated ones. So it's more his viewpoint as opposed to like Devadatta and Vaidehi and Ajatasattu. I'm sure they didn't come out and say, I'm an enlightened being and I'm going to teach you this. Okay. But Shinran Shonin saw them as such. Okay. So it's telling us more about who Shinran Shonin was than about who Devadatta, Ajatasattu, or Vaidehi was. Okay. Shinran Shonin saw them as like bodhisattva, if you will. But that's because he had this interesting heart of the Nembutsu. So it's telling us more about him than those individuals. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Right. Okay. If there's no other questions, I will see you in 2 weeks. Okay. 2 weeks then. Thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Sensei.
you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Thank you.